Look at that. Look at that hover. That's control for you, that is. That is the Huey. We are in the Canadian colours. Just showing off some of my mean helicopter skills. Welcome everybody, welcome to Flight Past. And my name is Simon, and we are using this Huey today in the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, and we're looking basically at moments in history. And if you've been following along, we're here, we're at in southern Belgium, and we are at the battlefield site of the of Waterloo. This is where Napoleon meets Wellington, and today we are continuing our discussion about this battle, and we're actually getting to the closing stages now. In the last stream, we were talking about the events that occurred over here. And this is the area where the Prussians came from, and we talked about Bulu's 4th Corps coming through here, the 2nd Corps of Perch coming through this area, and then over here on the on this northeastern side was where Ziethen's 1st Corps arrives on the battlefield. And we talked all the way about the whole fight for this village called Plancenoit, and how that affected the battlefield site. Plancenoit is this village just here. So we now divert our attention back now towards Wellington. But we're in full knowledge now that the events that are occurring up on this ridge here, where you can see this mound, is that has been affected by what's happening down here on Napoleon's right. And we can talk now about the La Haye Sainte, the farmhouse. Round about this time, 4:35 o'clock, we've got the French cavalry attacks coming up here, but they're not being supported by infantry. But La Haye Sainte starts to essentially run out of ammunition. This place here, it's an enclosed farmhouse. It's not really a fortified building. It's more just a sort of a quadrangle of farm buildings, not like Hougoumont. It's got a little bit more of a wall. It's got some loopholes in it, and it's got firing steps and stuff like that. But they were so desperate for warmth that they'd actually destroyed the barn gate to burn it in the night. So the actual west side of the farmhouse of La Haye Sainte was actually open at the time. Obviously it had some stuff in it to block it, but it wasn't actually a closed gate. The Major Baring, who was in charge of the defense of La Haye Sainte, had around about 400 men in there, and during the course of the day, Wellington had been supplying him with as much reinforcements as he could dare at the time. And allowed him to essentially lose the orchard of La Haye Sainte, which is this area to the south of it. We'll just zoom in, fly in here a little bit closer. We're using the drone. So this area to the south of La Haye Sainte, where these you can see these small trees, was an orchard. And Wellington allowed Baring to basically essentially come out into this orchard whenever he had to, but he could lose it if he wanted to, but do not lose the buildings themselves. And the reason why these buildings are so important, you've got essentially skirmishes in this building here, and it makes any attempt for the French to bring up artillery impossible in this area, because they will just be sharpshooted away. So this is an important position to control in the during the course of the battle. But with the course of, when we remember Erlon's infantry attacks over here, and essentially being surrounded a lot of the times in this building here, this the farmhouse starts to run out of ammunition. And essentially, Napoleon is aware of the strategic importance of this position. A bit like Hougoumont, and he tells Ney that this has got to be captured at all costs. And so, around about this time, thousands of infantry now are used to attack the farmhouse with some cavalry support. And they moved in from this side here, and they describe how using the folds of the battlefield to disguise their approach. And what I think it means is disguise the approach from the ridge above. Now remember, this pile of dirt over here on this conical is should be put back on the ridge, so this ridge might be a little bit steeper. And what they're talking about is they can, when they're down here, then they're not can be attacked from up on this side here, and you can use the folds to approach this way. Okay. The attack here is supported by artillery as well. This enables them to get right up to the building, and they start wrestling the weapons through these sort of holes that they've made. And hand-to-hand combat around this area on this barn. Even missing the door here, look. Seiborn describes this scene as well in this area of the barn, that they actually used the bodies of Frenchmen to pile up in the barn door entrance as a barricade. Bearing's situation is getting really bad at this time, and they're requesting ammunition. And it's at this time that the walls start to be scaled by the French. Now, around about this time as well, we get the Prince of Orange sees that the farmhouse is in trouble, and he orders a guy called Ompteda to attack the Tirailleurs. Now, Tirailleurs is a veteran of the peninsula. He's tells the prince, who is a 23-year-old, essentially that there's some concealed French cavalry in the vicinity. So presumably it could be that the crops are too high, or they're behind this orchard here somewhere. But the Prince of Orange is supposed to have called in Ompteda's called his courage into question. And so Ompteda carries on, has to carry on. And he moves his battalions, the battalions, the 5th Battalion and the 8th Battalion. Essentially, they move into line and to drive back these skirmishers from the edge of La Haye Sainte. And it's as they're in line doing this, and then of course they get attacked by a force of cavalry. And in this charge, Taylor is killed, and the 8th Line Battalion is essentially destroyed. The 5th Line was described as being further east, so presumably somewhere in this area here. And they just about managed to form square, and are covered by a partial charge by the Household Brigade. But essentially what it means is that La Haye-Sainte is remains unrelieved at this point. And so Ney is increasing the amount of troops that are coming into here, and eventually the farm falls. The ammunition is spent, and Major Baring and 42 men of the 9 companies detailed to defend this barn managed to escape through this garden and return to the line, the Allied line up here. And he describes this as, I think it was him who says this. It's a letter, actually it was Lieutenant Graham, but he says, we all had to pass through a narrow passage. We wanted to halt the men and make one more charge, but it was impossible. The fellows were firing down the passage. An officer of our company called to me, "Take care," but I was too busy stopping the men and answered, "Never mind, let the blackguard fire." And he was about 5 yards off and levelling his piece just at me when this officer stabbed him in the mouth and out through his neck, and he fell immediately. So the French are in this building here. But now they flocked in. This officer got 2 shots and ran into the room where he lay behind a bed all the time. They had possession of the house. Sometimes the room was full of them, and some wounded soldiers of ours who lay there and cried out "Pardon" were shot. The monsters saying, "Take that for the fine defence you've made." An officer and 4 men came first in, and the officer got me by the collar and said to his men, "Ceci coquin." Immediately the fellows had their bayonets down and made a dead stick at me, which I parried off with my sword, and the officer always running about and then coming to me again and shaking me by the collar. But they all looked so frightened and pale as ashes. I thought, "You shan't keep me," and I bolted through the lobby. They fired 2 shots after me and cried out "coquin," which means rascal, but they didn't follow me. I rejoined the remnant of the regiment, where we were immediately charged by cuirassiers. All the army was formed in squares, and we hastily got our men into a hollow and peppered them. So I believe they found the cuirass not thick enough for rifles. And that was a letter that Lieutenant Graham wrote. He was a member of the 2nd Light Battalion, and he wrote that in June 1815. And this is happening around about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. There's a description here as well about the impact that this has on the line. So Lieutenant Colonel Leach is the brevet major of the 95th Rifles, and he commanded, essentially they were commanding this area here to the sort of north of the farmhouse where this monument is. And he describes the loss of the farm had on the rest of the line. And the French, he said, instantly filled the house with the swarms of sharpshooters, whose deadly fire precluded the possibility of our holding the knoll and the ground immediately around it. So I believe they're talking about this area here, and we're talking possibly that they've taken this farmhouse, and they're now in a position to come into this garden and fire upon the British in the sandpit over there. they said they established strong and numerous line of infantry extending along the front of Kempt's brigade, and those Frenchmen, however, knelt down and exposed only their heads and shoulders to our fire. And in this manner, the contest was carried on between them and us until the general advance of the whole of the Duke of Wellington's army against the French position immediately after the total defeat of the Imperial Guard. So they're basically saying they're having a standoff here for the rest of the battle, which is probably going on for another two to 3 hours in this position. It says, from the time that the La Haye-Sainte fell into the hands of the French until the moment of the general advance of the army, the mode of attack and defence was remarkable for its sameness, but I speak merely of what took place immediately about our part of the position. So there seems to be a bit of a stalemate going on in this area from that point of view. He says the distance between the hostile lines, he imagined it to be about 100 yards. Between Kempt's and some of Lambert's regiments posted along the thorn hedge and the French infantry lining the knoll and the crest of the hill near it. So it suggests he's talking about a knoll. It's hard to see now because I think some of the material for that mound over there comes from this area. This road was a lot more sunken, and I think he's describing looking out in this direction here. He says, several times the French officers are making desperate attempts to induce their men to charge Kempt's line, and I saw more than once parties of the French in our front spring up from their kneeling position and advance some yards towards the thorn hedge. And this thorn hedge, I think, lines the road. Headed by officers with vehement gestures, but our fire was very hot and deadly that they almost instantly ran back behind the crest of the hill, always leaving a great many killed or disabled behind them. So I think we're talking about the defense in this area here. Essentially, so La Haye-Sainte is falling at around about 6 o'clock in the evening, and this is a significant part of the battle. This means that the French now can get a foothold onto the ridge here above us. And they manage eventually to, so they're forcing back the 95th from the sandpit here. They're all getting back on these buildings, by the way. I don't think were here at the time, and they're trying to push up onto this road at this point. They describe how the Tyrolese now extended east and west from the farmhouse, gaining positions on the ridge to be able to fire on the Allies. So we can assume then that they've managed now, because this farmhouse is no longer here anymore, they can now push up onto this top of this ridge here. They also describe how some light artillery are brought up as well, and they can then fire upon Kempt, Lambert and Alton squares. We mentioned that in the last stream, how Alton's squares were essentially killed in place because they were pinned, couldn't move, and run out of ammunition, but they were being fired upon by artillery. The 95th Rifles in this area here are trying their best to silence the artillery, and they say, but the artillery are brought further up, slightly more to the west to avoid them, so maybe a little bit further this way. And essentially what he's getting then is he's managing now to get his artillery up here to pour fire into the British squares. Okay, so that seems to be a good place to just take a quick break. Thank you for if you're watching for doing that, for listening. I'm going to take a quick couple of minute break, and when we come back, we will start to have a look at the situation. The desperate situation now on top of this ridge. I'm just trying to find a good place to start. We'll probably start discussing Wellington's running out of reserves and preparing for the approach of the old guard. Okay, I'll take a break there, and when I come back, we'll start off again. Hello, welcome to Flypast. My name is Simon, and welcome now to the climax, basically, of the Battle of Waterloo. We have got to a stage. It's around about 6 o'clock in the evening, and we've talked about the Prussians pushing onto Napoleon's right flank, and how La Haye-Saint, the farmhouse that's been held all day long, eventually falls because of the lack of ammunition, and this is meaning that the French can now move light artillery and their skirmishers onto the ridge between La Haye-Saint and Hougoumont and start firing at these Allied squares. And we're in the Huey, and we're just circling around here now. We're going to come back to the centre of Wellington's position. Now, and this around about 6 o'clock is a significant time. You remember, this is the time when, if Napoleon had not got the pressure on his right-hand side, down here on out the left window here, he could have sent many more of his reserves, his Imperial Guard, up this slope to Wellington to attack. But because he's getting this pressure from Bulu's corps on his left, he's having to send his reserves prematurely to his right, and these are the Young Guard, and we mentioned that in the previous stream section. And so this means that there is essentially a time when they could have been moving up here to take advantage of the cavalry attacks that have been going on. They don't, so they don't manage to do it. Now, Wellington uses this time when Napoleon is distracted on his right flank to reorganize his line. He redistributes his artillery. We hear a lot of like Captain Mercer mentions him being moved into different parts of the line, and he manages to bring up some Brunswickers to fill in some gaps and plug his holes in his line at this time. And muffling estimates, and remember, muffling is the Prussian liaison officer with Wellington, and he says in his dispatches that he believed that Wellington's disposable force at this time had reduced to somewhere in the region of about 30 to 35,000 men, and remember he started off with around about 90,000. So Wellington is running short of reserves, and people have argued, if Napoleon had gone in then, right at that point, before Wellington could organise his line, then Napoleon might have won the day. But it's down here, precisely at that time, in this village here called Place Noire, that the Prussians are starting to pressurise Napoleon's flank and rear. And eventually, the number of Prussians in this area below us becomes around about 2 corps strength, maybe a little less, because of the sort of wear and tear, and they're coming in kind of piecemeal, but they're building up, and the weight of numbers in this area just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. There's estimates by Seibel that there's probably almost 16,000 Prussians now on this side of the battlefield, and it's bringing in, and not only has Napoleon had to bring in his Young Guard to help Labal's corps in this section, he's also now having to committed his 2 battalions of his Old Guard, the creme de la creme, in this area here. And every single soldier that Napoleon is sending into this part of the battlefield is one less that he's sending up towards Wellington. Now remember, at the same time as Bulu is coming over from here, this area here, and Perch's corps coming here, we've got on this side, up where this dot is, the beginnings of Ziethen's corps arriving. Steinmetz was at the vanguard, and essentially he's managed to get his cavalry over to this area here, and that relieves Vivian's cavalry from defending this position on the Wellington's left flank, and they can go back across to help Wellington's centre. So the brigades of Vivian and Vandeleur are then moved from this left side here across to the centre. He brings up his Brunswick contingent. They are placed in reserve behind Maitland, basically plugging a line in the gap between Lambert and his guards. And it's believed that Wellington personally leads these Brunswickers forwards to the crest of the ridge. Now, it's believed Wellington sends a guy called Fremantle across to this left-hand side. We'll just circle around to that. To hurry these Prussians along, and Vivian receives this order, but he said he says he got it around about 6:45. So this is the crunch time here in the sense below us. Vivian's going to come across from this point here. He already says that before he got the order, he'd already came to the same conclusion that he had to come across. Because more and more Prussians are appearing on his left-hand side. And he describes the scene at this moment. He says, "We arrived most opportunely at the instant Bonaparte made his last and most desperate effort. Never did I witness anything so terrific. The ground actually covered with dead and dying, cannon shots and shells flying thicker than I have ever heard even musketry before, and our troops, some of them, giving way." Lieutenant Colonel Murray, he was of the 18th Hussars, so they tend to be the sort of troops that would be flanking troops. He describes that he moved from the left to the centre at this time. He describes the reduced state of Somerset and Ponsonby's cavalry brigades in the centre. He describes wounded or mutilated horses wandered or turned in circles. The noise was deafening, and the air of ruin and desolation that prevailed wherever the eye could reach gave no inspiration of victory. And that was a letter that he wrote about 10 years later in 1835. Some of these Brunswickers that were brought in, they actually did break, but they were essentially prevented from leaving the battlefield by Vivian's cavalry. So the cavalry is moving across from here behind Wellington's positions, and they're basically stopping the, trying to stop the infantry from abandoning the field. And they say that Wellington tried to bring them back forwards, and he placed them in an area behind, essentially behind the ridge, behind La Haye Sainte, around about here, just outside of the effective musketry fire. Now there's reports of remember Ortega's brigades and Kilman's and Zeger's brigades. They've broken in this area. They had started to reorganize themselves on the eastern side of the battlefield, out of further range. So presumably in this area back here somewhere. And at the moment, at this time, so we're talking 6:30, 6:45, 7 o'clock, the Wellington's trying to organise his troops. We talked about him getting his guards into line. They're trying to force these tirailleurs, pesky skirmishers that are occupying the ridge now, and they're being able to take shots at his troops, and they're trying to sort of force these Tyrellis back off this the ridge. That then allows them, his gunners, then to man their pieces, and would allow them then to delay or push back some of the artillery and infantry. Reports here at this time as well is that, remember, the Prince of Orange had ordered Ortega forwards, and he had gone even though Ortega had told him that there was French cavalry in the area, but he now is involved in rallying some Nassers, and he leads them forward on the eastern side, and it's during this motion of bringing them forwards, they broke again, and it's during this time that the Prince of Orange receives a musket ball in the left shoulder, knocks him off his horse, and this is what this big mound of dirt represents. It's the Prince of Orange is getting shot in the shoulder, so we can assume that is the site of where he got injured at this time. And the Prince of Orange is carried off the field, and the Nassers who had broken, they were caught up by the Allied cavalry line and were brought forward once again when there was a break in some of the pressure that the French were producing. So the Prince of Orange isn't seriously wounded, and in fact he would attend a ball within a few days of the battle. So at this time there's a slight a break in the action. This allows Wellington to reorganize his batteries, so resupply his ammunition. The 95th Rifles, they begin to clean their rifles, and then they start themselves harassing the French sharpshooters in La Haye-Sainte, and this is when Chassey's division is brought up and placed in the line. And back here, this is the Boîte aux Soignes. There's reports here of people who have fled the battlefield, come into these woods. They actually start cooking and soup and things like that in the relative safety. And the road to Brussels is described as this is by a guy called Lieutenant Wyndham. He was from the Scots Greys. He says, the road was one varied scene from the time I left the village of Waterloo until I arrived at Brussels. Men, women and children were ridden over by the runaway Belgians and a few of our own people. Baggage wagons, guns, etc. lying in the middle of the road. So there's a sort of... Remember, this is also the time where the Duke of Cumberland is ridden off the battlefield because he believes that he's... the battle's lost. The Prussians and their initial thoughts, Ziethen's, remember Ziethen's chief of staff, Reich, he believes that the battle is lost. It looks like Wellington's losing this position here. There's a lot of desertion going on, fleeing the battlefield, panic setting in. The Duke of Cumberland actually rides off the battlefield, goes back to Brussels and tells everybody in Brussels that the battle is lost. So at this point it's not looking great. But so there's a sort of a slight sort of I don't know, prejudice against some of these Belgium units, but some of the Dutch units, Chassés, Nassers, they're newly arrived from across from Braine-l'Alleud. They actually performed very, very well, and they have during the whole of the battle campaign, the Waterloo campaign. They did perform well at Quatre Bras, and they were performing well here, and they had done a sterling defence as well down at the Hougoumont. Let's just pause here, jump out. So, in this area now, what we have, so basically between La Haye-Sainte and Hougoumont, this is going to be the scene of the heaviest fighting and the hardest fighting, essentially, of the day. We have... starting on this sort of eastern side, there's Optega's King's German Legion on this side, followed by Kilsmeger's Hanoverian Brigade. You got Kruser's Nassau's, and then you have, excuse me, 4 Brunswick battalions, Dijkma's Dutch Belgian Brigade, Colin Hackett's reduced British Brigade. So in this area here stands 6 brigades of infantry, and the 2 original batteries in this area has now been increased to 5. So all in all, and there's more troops here than has been stationed here at any part of the battle. So further west then we have Maitland's Guards, Adams' Brigade of Fresh Light Infantry, 2 battalions of fragile Brunswickers held together by the continued presence of essentially Mercer's Royal Horse Artillery. And then the line kind of bends essentially down to Hougoumont here. So Wellington also, he's brought over Vivian and Vandeleur's cavalry, as I said. They've come across from the left-hand side, and he's stationed them basically behind here. And to prevent, to hold the line and prevent it from crumbling. Now, I don't know what time it is, but around about this time, it's reported that a deserting cavalry officer would ride up here and reports to Wellington that he basically says, "Get ready. That scoundrel Napoleon will be upon you with his guard in less than half an hour." Now, by 7 o'clock, it's believed Cyborn has got essentially 49,000 Prussians and 123 guns have arrived on the field by 7 p.m. This is a number that Wellington will dispute later. He says it over. It gives the Prussians too much influence on the battlefield. But if it's true, and we mentioned 16,000 before, anywhere between 16,000 and 49,000, there is still a significant amount of troops coming over from this side at this time, and it's about 7 p.m. Now, Major General Sir Hussey Vivian He wrote to Cyborn, commentating on the Prussians at the time. He said the fact that was after the attack of the Prussians, theirs might almost be called the general action. Fighting had in a great degree ceased along our line, excepting on one front, i.e. the attack of the Imperial Guard, so that the Prussian army must of course cut a conspicuous figure at the moment chosen for representation on the model. So yeah, he sort of hints there that the action has narrowed to a very small part of Wellington's line because of the significant impact of the Prussians on this side of the battlefield. And Major General Sir Hussey Vivian, now remember he's the guy who was over here and brings his cavalry around to Wellington. So he's obviously in a good position to understand the amount of Prussians that were coming across this side of the battlefield. He goes on to say, we were greatly indebted to the Prussians, and it was their coming on the right and rear of Napoleon that gave us the victory at Waterloo. And it's my personal theory, or having looked at this a lot, that essentially Wellington ensures that there could not be a French victory at Waterloo, but the Prussians ensure that there would be an Allied victory, and that's how I like to look at it. So without Wellington here, then Napoleon would have won. But without the Prussians, then the Allies wouldn't have won, if you get my drift. Right, so we shall leave it here. We'll take a quick break. The time is at 7 o'clock in the evening. It's the 18th of June, and we are approaching the famous march of the Old Guard up to this position, essentially behind this panorama of the Battle of Waterloo, and we shall discuss that in the next part. If you've liked what you've heard, then please give a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you in a moment. Thank you, guy at the back, for your kind comment. Here we are then. This is the view of what the Old Guard would have seen, essentially at around about 7 o'clock in the evening on the 18th of June 1815. And we've been talking up to this point. This is the crux of the Battle of Waterloo. And I'd like to thank you, everybody who's got this far, joined me and taken part. So the situation has been that the Prussians are arriving on the right flank, and that's allowing Wellington to draw in his flanks and put them into this area here, right in front of us. And Ney has sent his cavalry in. He's asked for reinforcements, and just at the point when he wants the reinforcements, the infantry reinforcements and the guard to be sent in, the Prussians are attacking Plancenoit on the right-hand side, and Napoleon has to toughen up his right flank. He has to send elements of the Young Guard in, and even 2 battalions of Old Guard on his right flank. And this means that the crisis point where it could have had a major effect has passed. It's almost an hour and a half now later, and essentially Napoleon is starting to prepare his Old Guard to move up on this ridge. It's a kind of a do or die thing at the moment. I think he realizes that the number of Prussians arriving on his flank means that this is the real crux of the battle. Now, the Duke of Wellington becomes aware of the enemy's preparations for a new attack, and he orders his guards, it's believed, to get into these sort of files of 4, sort of almost like a solid sort of line, really. And just as he gets them into a formation, there's 2 columns essentially of the Imperial Guard start to move up these slopes here. One of them is believed to be the Grenadiers, and the other one is of the Chasseurs. Now, what was the route that they took? We can sort of divine a little bit here. This is one of them. As the attacking force moved forward, it separated the Chasseurs inclined to their left, and the Grenadiers ascended the hill in a more of a direct course. So we can sort of feel like it's sort of like coming up here, and one of them does move over to the left. They're almost in an echelon formation again. And they describe leaving La Haye Sainte to their right. So this is this building here. So they're in this sort of region here. So this is some notes here by, I think it's a letter by Maitland, who was the commanding officer of the 1st Brigade, and he wrote this in 1834. So let's see what he has to say. So this is he's an eyewitness of this attack. He says at about 7 o'clock, the Duke of Wellington, aware of the enemy's preparations for a new attack, desired me to form the brigade into the line 4 files deep. His Grace, he said, expected there to be cavalry support. The formation of the brigade was scarcely completed before the advance of the enemy. became apparent. The force employed by the enemy in this service consisted of 2 strong columns of infantry, a third corps consisting of both cavalry and infantry being in reserve. The attacking columns were alike composed of the infantry of the Imperial Guard, the Grenadiers forming one column, and the chasseurs of the corps of the other one. So we can, I think Maitland may be in this area here. As the attacking force moves forward, it separates the chasseurs inclined to their left, and the Grenadiers moved more of a direct course. And then they had pieces of ordnance were distributed on the flanks of this column. So they're obviously marching with artillery. The brigade suffered from the enemy's artillery, but it withheld its fire for the nearer approach of the column, and the latter, after advancing steadily up the slope, halted about 20 paces from the front rank of the brigade. So we're talking about this slope here, and the old guard are moving up this slope. And they say when they get to around about probably somewhere in this area here, they stop. He says that his brigade is suffering from enemy artillery. The range is narrowed, and they're firing essentially grape shot into them. He mentions that the smoke of the artillery happily did not envelop the hostile column or serve to conceal it from our aim. So they're not the columns, or the smoke from the artillery is not fogging the battlefield. And then he says, with what view the enemy halted in a situation so perilous. So he's wondering why they halted in this area here. And then he says, the fire of his brigade opens with terrible effect. The enemy's column, crippled and broken, retreated with the utmost rapidity, leaving only a heap of dead and dying men to mark the ground which it had occupied. So that is a recollection there of Maitland's experience of this old guard attack. So this is Napoleon's last attack, and let's look at Captain Cyborn, who was charged with making a model of the Battle of Waterloo, and he chooses this moment as the one that he wanted to convey. He starts. He had a pamphlet produced at the time that accompanied the model that he made. And in it, he says, the gradual development of the principal portions of the Prussian army under Prince Blucher, by which so powerful a diversion was effected against the French right, rendered it imperative on Napoleon to resort to one of two alternatives. He could either commence a retreat or to make another desperate attempt to break the Duke's line and establish his left on the Allied position, and at the same time to maintain a firm stand against the Prussians on his right. So, and of course, we know that Napoleon tries the desperate. He couldn't, and I don't think he could have extracted the French army in any way possible at this point, really, without significant damage to his to the morale of the army. Let's talk about what he actually had then in terms of troops. So the 3 Guard infantry divisions composed of 4 regiments. One of these divisions was the Young Guard, who were these were the ones who were in action over here against the Prussians in Plançois. And they had a couple of battalions of the Old Guard with them to try to hold this village here. So there's 8 remaining regiments. 4 of them were chasseurs numbered 1 to 4, and 4 were grenadiers, again numbered 1 to 4. And the Old Guard consisted of the 1st and 2nd grenadiers and the 1st and 2nd chasseurs. So each regiment was composed of 2 battalions. And the Middle Guard consisted of the 3rd and 4th grenadiers and the 3rd and 4th chasseurs. And again, each regiment had 2 battalions, except for the 4th grenadiers and the 4th chasseurs that had 1. So what does that mean? Well, the Emperor, the Napoleon, therefore had at least 11 fresh battalions of the Imperial Guard infantry at his disposal at around about 7:30. And so the Wellington would have been able to see these battalions begin their advance, and they emerged, it said, from behind La Belle Alliance. So this is the La Belle Alliance here. So from Wellington's position back here, that is the place where they begin their march up this slope to this point here. So Wellington can see that the attack that is coming at this time is mainly infantry, but he is worried about some cavalry elements, and there is definitely some artillery being brought up with these troops. And Wellington is always in the crisis point, so he's in this area around here. And he orders the Brunswickers, who are over here above Hourmont, and Adams' Brigade and Maitland's Guards to form line in 4 ranks deep. So this is the crunch area we're talking about, is in this area here. So why 4 lines? Well, it's similar to the line, obviously, but a little bit shorter. But it's also it's a similar sort of look to a square formation. You tended to have a 1 line kneeling, 1 line standing, and some people firing from behind it. So from the front, it has the same sort of impact on any cavalry charge. It kind of looks like a square. It does mean that the 4 ranks can, you can turn around and essentially become a sort of a fortified line if you had to. But it is a good compromise because it allows you to get as many guns as possible facing this direction, this way. And also it does tend to, because it's a line, it has less impact when it comes to artillery. Not as good as 2 ranks, but it's better than being in a square. Now, Wellington also orders Bolton's battery and other Allied batteries in this area to open fire as soon as they had a target, because he wanted the Old Guard to be depleted as much as possible by the time they reached his line. And with so much smoke on the battlefield, it was instead, he just wanted them to fire when they could and when they could see what that was going on. A quick note as well, something I haven't mentioned before is this idea of a false message being sent to the French. It's known as the Voilà Grouchy incident. He obviously is expecting, was hoping for Grouchy to come over from the right, but it's not. It's actually the Prussians. But there's a rumor spread essentially over this side that keep fighting. There's essentially Grouchy's coming to our aid. And I've mentioned the incident as well where a French officer rides up here and essentially surrenders, shouting "Vive le Roi" and telling skirmishers in the area to pass on information to Wellington to say that the Guard are on their way. Sir John Colburn, who was Colonel 52nd Regiment, he remembers and that as we were ascending the hill, a French colonel of the cuirassiers galloped out of the French ranks, hollering out "Vive le Roi," repeating, and rode up to me and said, "Ce Napoleon est avec la garde, voilà l'attaque qui se fait." And the officer remained in his as his prisoner for some time. And I think the message that was sent, it was Napoleon actually asked Bedoye to send the message to his troops, saying that essentially, because I think what he was looking at was over here, which was Ziethen's corps coming through the trees to the north, and he was trying to make it sound like it was Grouchy coming through it. So it was just a desperate attempt to bolster morale at this point. So the let's talk about the actual advance. I mean, we think that there wasn't much skirmish cover for the Old Guard on this walk. There wasn't much artillery support. But when the Old Guard are in this valley here, the battery behind fires over their heads, so that might give them reason why it felt like it had a lot more support than it did. But of course, remember the majority of Wellington's troops are behind this ridge here. Leake, Ensign Leake, he wrote a good description of this time. He says that the regiment, his regiment, which was the 52nd Regiment, stood about 40 paces below the crest of the position, so that it was nearly, but not quite, out of the fire. So we can imagine that, 40 yards, somewhere like this. So you just, that might be a good position that matches that description. He says that the roar of round shots still continued, many only just clearing our heads, others striking the top of our position and bounding over us, others again almost spent and rolling down gently towards us. And one of these, when we were standing in line, came rolling down like a cricket ball, so slowly that I was putting out my foot to stop it, when my colour sergeant quickly begged me not to do so and told me it might have seriously injured my foot. So this is the sort of position that we're talking about, that Ensign Leake is talking about in his 52nd Regiment. So there's balls flying over his head, they're bouncing along the ground near him, but they're out of the direct line of sight of the artillery, so they're kind of just firing blind at this point. So with a cloud of sort of skirmishers Wellington had, these are kind of gradually pushed back, and through this smoke in the valley, they said, he describes that there was a column of the old guard. They marched in one behind the other in short columns with a 2-company frontage. So it's a 6-company battalion. So it would be 60 files broad by 9 files deep. So it's essentially like a big oblong. In closed-up formation, a battalion would be as little as 80 yards deep, and the column advanced north parallel but 200 yards to the west of the Ginope Road. And it says as it came, so 200 yards west, so this is the road, and it says when it became level with the Hougoumont enclosure, which I believe is this area here, so around about here, it assumed an echelon formation of battalion columns, with the most easterly leading and the others successively moving further to the west, intending to strike the Allied line at 7 different points. So it's kind of like a leading column coming up here, and then in an echelon formation coming back. Someone else here is this Captain Thackwell. He's of the 15th Hussars. He describes the formation of the French as a body of about 1,000 infantry in square, supported by a large body of cuirassiers. So again, there's a little bit of disagreement in what was the formation used and what it looked like. Now it says as well that when ascending this slope here, the guard falls out of sight for them, and it seems while passing through this smoke and this area, they lost their echelon formation and reunited into 2 columns. So that sounds like they sort of caught up with each other, and they had 400 yards to go. They became visible to the Allied gunners, and every piece that could pour double charges into the formation did. So this double charge is a canister of almost like a shotgun kind of effect, but it also had a a round shot, or even had 2 canisters, one on top of the other. So the guns were up here, and they start to fire down onto the old guard as they come up. Now this type of firing was something they didn't do very often, because it did put an incredible amount of stress on the piece, on the artillery piece. But in this scenario, it was literally it was do or die, so they just went for it. Now, this is when Wellington, so the guard, they're hit, but they don't go break. Wellington is now behind Maitland's line, and the British Guards are in this sort of area here, and he says that it's said at the time that they allow the old guard to get within 40 yards of Maitland's line. Remember, they're in this sort of 4 line formation, and this is when Wellington is supposed to have shouted, "Now, Maitland, now is your time," followed by "Up, guards, make ready and fire." Maitland's guards fire their half company volleys. They had a front of approximately 400 men firing on a column which is about 60 men wide, and so the head of the column are not only just receiving a huge amount of fire, but they're almost the line of the guards are overlapping the column, so they're taking it in the sides as well. And adjacent units are also brought into the musketry duel. On the eastern side, Hackett brings up his 2 weak battalions of the 33rd and the 69th, and they pour more fire into the French column's right flank. Now, the 4-line formation, it has been suggested, might have been also used to allow the 3rd and 4th ranks to reload for the first 2 firing lines, or it could have been that they would just take their turn. I'm not sure exactly what they did, but it meant that there was a lot of fire happening rapidly on these columns. And it's believed that there was possibly fire from this side as well, onto the side of the columns. Now, because remember, you've got 2 columns attacking with a 60 men wide front, or even more, whatever. It does mean that once you know where they are going to impact, then the troops on the flanks can then move around and fire on their sides. So, for example, on the western side here, Colborne anticipates the Duke of Wellington's wishes, and he brings forward the 52nd from this, what he calls the Hougoumont salient. So it will basically essentially coming in here, and he starts to attack the left flank of the Imperial Guard. And it's believed at this time as well that the French are trying to move. It seems like, that intimidating force, this intimidating column that's moving up. And they get to this sort of top, and then they sort of pause and they're trying to move now into line, and the French officers are trying to reorganize their units and to span out into line in order to meet this firepower. But at the same time, the British they're trying to reorganize themselves, and the British are pouring fire into these columns. And now Napoleon, of course, never fought Wellington before, and this formation would be intimidating on any battlefield, but the use of the reverse slope has a huge psychological effect in diminishing the psychological effect of the enemy, and also increasing your bravery. And I would much rather not see what's coming, if you know what I mean, and then just told to stand up and fire, than have to watch a column moving towards me. And so at this point, the old guard starts to waver. They're trying to move into a line formation, possibly. They're getting attacked on the flanks. They're having experienced troops pouring their gunfire into these into the old guard. And remember, Wellington's been at the crisis point all day long. He's been there. And he manages to put these troops, his Maitland's troops, in this position where he's got some of the most experienced troops of his army at the crux point of the battle. And that is one of the biggest differences that we have compared to Napoleon, who's right back there, probably at Belle Alliance. He's not with his troops. In fact, his brother later would be critical that Napoleon hadn't led his guard personally up this slope. He was told to turn back. So that was one of the columns. Of course, what happens to the other one? The other one was slightly to the east. Essentially, probably in this area here, and they were advancing against the. They were a smaller force, it's believed, probably around about 2 battalions, a column, possibly separated by about 50 yards, and these are met essentially by Colin Halkett's formation, the 30th and the 73rd, again formed into 4 deep lines. And we hear stories here of the Chassé's Dutch-Belgian division performing well. Chassé was certainly personally involved in the ordering of a Dutch-Belgian horse artillery battery to move up and open up with the guns on the French, who were little more than 100 yards away. And the old guard essentially just finds themselves outnumbered over here. And the psychological shock effect of the old guard just hadn't done its job. And so this is the position, and it's just at this point, it's around about somewhere in around about 7:30, something like that, and maybe later, there's a whole shift in morale happens on the French side, and cries of La Garde recule spreads across the battlefield. And that's a good place then to take a little break. And when we come back, we'll discuss this the knocking back of the old guard at this point. We'll discuss the general consensus about it, and the sort of some of the different stories around it, and that would be a good time to then wrap up this part of this stream. So we will go away now, and I'll have a quick break, and when we come back, La Garde recule. Welcome to Flight Path. My name is Simon, and we are talking about the battlefield of Waterloo, and we've got to the stage of the last attack of Napoleon up this slope here on the western side of the battlefield. The exact circumstances of this attack is disputed over the years. It's not clear sometimes what formation was being used and who fought. There was some of the first foot guard were given later the title of grenadiers because they believed they fought the grenadiers, but it's actually possible they fought the chasseurs instead. There's an argument about who repulsed who, but the attack basically occurs over a reasonably long time over a reasonably wide front that all possibilities could be true. But there was definitely a lot of arguments in the United Services magazine afterwards about who did what at this point. But remember, the smoke is thick, visibility is probably less than 200 yards. Mercer, who I believe was over on this side here, was so concerned, preoccupied with being shelled by artillery over this side, that he fails to notice that he's even involved in the final throes of the battle. And as we mentioned in previous episodes as well, Kincaid of the 95th Rifles, he was in a sort of a skirmishing fight in this area around here, and he had a poor visibility, and he was unaware that the old guard had even been repulsed. I don't think he even heard Wellington's order for a general advance. The advance itself, it's believed that Napoleon began it, or would lead it, and he would lead it from, it's believed, somewhere in this area here. They start to move on. Now, again, there's questions about the direction, but at some point along here, the command of the old guard is transferred from Napoleon to Ney. And then they talk about, well, why is there different directions, that rather than moving straight up here, which you could argue they could have done because Le Haisson was now in their control. This was also some of the weaker troops in this area here. Why didn't he do that? Well, we know that this was a sunken lane, quite a steep one, so they were probably trying to come in at this angle from here onwards. But Ney leads them in a sort of a northwest direction rather than a north direction. So we know that at least 5 battalions of Old Guard are moved up here. In this fighting as well, we believe Ney has another horse shot from him, so he then continues the battle on foot. And from around about 200 yards, there's this sort of horseshoe of Allied artillery, essentially, that are firing down on the Old Guard in this area here. Now, there's reports that the 1st Battalion of the 3rd Regiment of Grenadiers, they actually have some success. They overrun some Brunswickers. But essentially, though, what we're talking about here is that even at this time, the Old Guard are outnumbered. So yes, the confusion is so great at this point, and the visibility is so poor that several officers claimed afterwards that their columns in front of them were the ones to break. That they should have the principal credit for the defeat of the Imperial Guard. But it seems to have sort of happened all at the same time, and then there's a sort of a general panic occurs. And so let's. There's a good description here from Captain Powell, and he was in this area. He was in part of the Foot Guards, and they were attacked, believed to be attacked by the 1st and 2nd battalions of the 3rd Regiment of Chasseurs. They were behind, he says, behind the banks of a road, which is this road here. And he says without this road, every creature must have perished. Suddenly the fire increased. Suddenly the fire ceased, and as the smoke cleared away, a most superb sight opened on us. A close column of grenadiers who were ascending the rise opposed the charge, shouting "Vive l'Empereur!" They continued to advance until about 50 to 60 yards in our front, and when the brigade, and then the brigade is ordered to stand up. So it suggests here that they're lying down here, and the initial fire is the artillery firing over the heads of the old guard, and the old guard are essentially down in this valley here. Well, not really a valley, but you know what I mean. And they're coming up this slope. And when they get to the top here, it's believed that the Wellington himself said, "Up, guards, ready." And so Powell's carries on and says, whether it was from the sudden and unexpected appearance of a corps so near to them, I don't think he means a corps, I think he means battalion, but which must have seemed as if starting out of the ground, or tremendously heavy fire we threw into them. Like the guard, who had never before failed an attack, suddenly stopped, and in less than a minute, about 300 of these guard were down, and they now begin to waver, and several of the rear divisions begin to draw out as if to deploy. So it sounds like they come up to 60 yards in column formation, and then they're trying to deploy into a line. The only chance of success for the ranks of the French to press forward, but the officers of the Chasseurs have chosen instead to try to form them into line and meet them with fire. So that's probably one of the mistakes. They should have just carried on, possibly, but they tried to move it into a line, and the British are just pouring fire into them, and as they try to reform, increasing the amount of confusion, and then with the waiver, Wellington orders a charge, and essentially the French are outnumbered and they're pushed back, he says, with hand-to-hand combat and in the direction of the orchard at Hougoumont. Now that would be essentially this area here, which is below us now. And so we get the shouts of La Garde recall, and it echoes along the front, and it triggers a wholesale withdrawal, it's mentioned here, and signalling the battle is lost. Now, I don't know how it happens, or if it starts on this side here, but Alex and Donzela's divisions see the guard fall back across the rear, and they withdraw, which and then that brings them the whole sort of front down like a house of cards. And this is the point where I think Duret's infantry, they're supposed to be over here. They're meeting fresh troops, and the news gets through again, probably shouts, screams, whatever. It's that the news is that these troops are not Grouchy, they are Prussians, and so that triggers a wave of retreat. There's cries of "Nous sommes trahis," this is basically we are what's the word? Trahis. It's like we are we have been betrayed. I think. Let me have a look. Yeah, so we are deceived. We are betrayed, essentially, and basically save yourselves. And so you get this sort of ripple and cascade effect going on the French army. La Garde Recul, we are deceived. You know, it's all happening right now. The attacks late in the, so this is a letter from Lieutenant Leslie. He's of the 79th Cameroon Highlanders. There's no date on this letter, but he says the attack was late in the day and we had not long regained our position when at the period to which you allude, the enemy in front of us seemed moving forward a fresh column of simultaneous attacks to that on the right of our line. This was checked by the appearance of the Prussians breaking from the wood on the left of our position. So that seems to suggest, from his point of view, that the trigger for this retreat is actually a Prussian presence on the left. This is a guy, Major Brown. He was of the 40th Regiment, and he wrote a letter in 1835. And he said that the Prussian army had appeared about an hour previous to our final advance to the hedge, which is the time that they came up to this hedge here to meet the French attack. They were coming from the woods some considerable distance to our left of our position, so presumably from over here, but he says they were nearer to the French and were rapidly advancing along the plain, having previously attacked, and were then in the act of turning the enemy's right. This, I presume, was the occasion for the confusion which was at that time so manifest in the enemy's lines and amongst several of his divisions, and he says, and which the Duke of Wellington so promptly took advantage of. So that suggests that if you're on this side of the battlefield in this area here, the reason for the French retreating is because of the Prussians arriving on the left. But if you're on this side of the battlefield, what you're getting is that the surprise standing up of the foot guards, piling in of musketry into the old guard, is making them, the old guard, recul and go back. So what I think you're getting is a combination of the two. You're getting this sort of, one side is you've got the La Garde recul, the other side it goes, we have been deceived, and it's all sort of rippling along the French lines in some sort of fashion. And so when you get to this point here and you're getting infantry fired into you by outnumbered, and then you're looking right and people are pulling back on this side, and you're just kind of like, you know, we're not going to be able to do this on our own, and we pull back. So Victor Hugo at this point, he says, this is in Les Miserables, a disbanding army is a thaw. The whole bends, cracks, snaps, floats, rolls, falls, crashes, hurries, plunges. It's a mysterious disintegration. And I think that really sums up the way that this the French army just collapses. Is it one thing or another? Does the old guard on this side know anything about the advance of the Prussians on the other side? it's all essentially here about individual battles going on all along this line here, and so you have to give Wellington credit, and it goes all the way back to the decision to fight the battle here. The topography, as I say, the whole point of this channel is topography and distances. This is the reason why the French essentially lose on this day, because of the shape of the ground here. And it was chosen by Wellington in 1814 as a place to fight a battle. Less than 15 minutes later, Wellington rides to the top of the ridge. This is after the old guard have gone back. He comes up to the top of this ridge, and in somewhere around here, he will lift his hat into the air, and he waves it in the air as a signal for a general advance. And essentially, any attack, any formation that was still fit, was to join in the advance. And Vivian and Vandeleur's cavalry, who remember had come back across from the left and were sitting in the rear here, they will take up the vanguard of the chase down into the valley. Fraser, Augustus Fraser, he was said he had seen nothing like that moment. The sky literally darkened with smoke, the sun just going down, and which we had not for some hours broken through the gloom of the day, the indescribable shouts of thousands, where it was impossible to distinguish between friend and foe. Every man's arm seemed to be raised against that of every other. Suddenly, after the mingled mass had ebbed and flowed, the enemy began to yield, and the cheerings and English huzzas announced the day must be ours. And Kincaid is over here. He's on the left-hand side of the line. He's so immersed in smoke, and he doesn't know what this cheering means. And the movement carried us clear of the smoke and to people who had been in for so many minutes enveloped in darkness in the midst of destruction, and naturally anxious about the result of the day. The scene which now met the eye conveyed a feeling of a most exquisite gratification that can be conceived. It was a fine summer's evening just before sunset, and the French were flying in one confused mass, and British lines were seen essentially in close pursuit, in admirable order, as far as the eye could reach to the right, while the plain to our left was filled with Prussians. So he's in this area here, somewhere around here, and he's looking out, and he can see essentially an advancing army on one side, and on the left, he says this section here is just full of Prussians. Now, what time do we think this is? Well, we believe it's somewhere around 8 o'clock in the evening that this occurs. And at the same time, we got to remember the Prussians have taken back Plancenoit. Remember that? We did that in the previous stream. It's around about 8 o'clock, I think. Yeah, it's something like 10 past 8. There's reports it could be 10 past 8 that the actual order to advance occurs. Vivian's brigade is moved forward in this area here, riding on. And Vivian, by the way, he describes this. He says he wrote a letter to his wife on the 23rd of June. He said, "No words can give an idea of how a man escaped it to me is a miracle. We every instant expecting through the smoke to see the enemy appearing under our noses, and for the smoke was literally so thick that we could not see 10 yards off. But at last began to find that the shots did not come so thick, and I discovered that the enemy were, instead of advancing to gain our position, retrograding on theirs. The moment of attack was arrived and received orders to advance." So he's obviously back here. He can feel the weight of arms coming over this ridge. And he says, as you say, you can imagine it just sort of depleting, and then he's then ordered forwards. He rides along the line, he says, to Colborne, which is on this side here. But essentially comes down into this area in this way. And actually, Colborne is advised by Clinton, I think it is. He's shouted, "Go on, Colborne, go on." He said, "They won't stand. Don't give them the chance to rally." Sorry, that was Vivian's shouting to Colborne, who was in this area here. If I remember, they were the ones firing on the flank. Major Francis Hepburn, he was of the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Foot Guards. He wrote in 1834, "During this time I knew nothing of what was passing elsewhere. In about an hour or more after the resumption of our post, a staff officer came from the left at full gallop with orders for an immediate advance, stating that the whole army were moving on to the charge. We passed the hedge and moved upon the troops in the cornfield, who retired in no order and almost without firing." He was essentially in over here in defending Hougoumont. And essentially what happens is Vivian starts to do these sort of controlled charges in this area. The enemies are broken and the cavalry are sent out essentially to stop these guys from reforming. And if they're going to retire, then make them rout off the battlefield itself. Captain Barton, he was of the 12th Light Dragoons. He says the scene here was terrific. From the great number of killed and wounded, bodies were lying so close to each other that our horses could scarcely advance without trampling on them, and a great many were wounded in the fetlocks from the bayonets and other weapons that were scattered about in the field. So he's describing there that the actual horses were getting injured by the equipment in this area. He mentions the Grenadiers as Cheval of the Imperial Guard. They formed into a dense column and appeared to take little notice of our advance. They literally just walked from the field in a most majestic manner. There's talk here. There's around about this time the Prussians actually managed to push through Place Noire, and they would sweep onto the Genappe Road. And it would actually, so I think they come around this side here, and we're talking around about where the Belle Alliance was. And actually there's confusion here where some of the Allied cavalry actually engage each other. And we're talking a possible a meet-up point was La Belle Alliance. That sounds a little bit too contrived. People kind of consensus is it's probably more down the road here, somewhere in this area, that they actually met up. And to give Wellington his due, now there's a whole argument about what happens about this story. He does write in his Waterloo dispatch that was written a couple of days after this battle to say, I should not do justice to my own feelings or to Marshal Blucher and the Prussian army if I did not attribute the successful result of this arduous day to the cordial and timely assistance I received from them. And that, I think, we will just end this stream at this point. And when we come back, we will discuss in the next stream the pursuit of the French back along this road here towards back to Paris. And we'll look into the routes that were taken and some of the politics involved as they essentially chase Napoleon off and out of Belgium. Is it the end of the French army? I mean, at the end of the day, we still got to talk about Grouchy, and Grouchy's got over 33,000 men at Wavre, and he's fighting Thielman, so we'll look into that battle. And then we'll discuss whether it would have been possible for Napoleon to have put up some sort of defense between here and Paris. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I'm glad that we now managed to get to the battlefield of Waterloo. I've been breaking these up into little parts that are going on to YouTube, so you can just have to watch them in little 20-minute snippets. And we're well over like 90 episodes now of that, so it's been a huge amount of work involved, and I would really appreciate it that a like is the compensation I get for that amount of work. But we will come back in the next stream, and we'll continue the journey, and we're essentially going to finish this in St. Helena. And just to prepare you as well for the next subject, it's likely to be the Falklands War. So if you want to do your homework on that, you can start reading some excellent books out there on that subject. So with that, then I would like to say thank you, and hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one.